Good evening and welcome to the National Writers Series. Much thanks to our donors and sponsors who helped to make this great conversation possible. Also, thanks to Ben Whiting for putting together the video and slides shown at the beginning of our event. He's captured our painted downtown beautifully in the video. I'm so happy you could join us for this wonderful event with Molly Wizenberg, who wrote the best-selling memoir, The Fixed Stars. It tells the story of her journey from what she always thought as being true about herself, a mom, a wife, and happily married for nearly 10 years, and then everything changing after falling in love with a woman who was an attorney she met while serving on jury duty. Hi, I'm Lisa Thalvet. I am a board member of the National Writers Series. We are a nonprofit that hosts nationally renowned authors in Traverse City, Michigan. We also support literacy programs for children of all ages, so please check out our website and see all of the fun things we do here locally with schools and students. This is the great thing about storytelling. It's an art form that binds us together as humans, regardless of our age or our background. We're happy to keep the conversation going with authors and storytellers, even if we all can't be together in our usual space of the City Opera House. But everything has a silver lining, and this one is being able to still enjoy great conversations no matter where you happen to be tuning in. Our guest host, Elon Cameron, has over 25 years of organizing experience and co-founded Up North Pride, which is the largest participant-driven LGBTQ plus march in Michigan. She is a powerful force for good. She's a writer, artist, healer, and mystic. Molly Wizenberg has written 2 best-selling memoirs, including A Homemade Life and Delancey. She was, for 15 years, the voice behind the James Beard award-winning blog, Orangette. With author Matthew Amster Burton, she co-hosts the hit food and comedy podcast, Spilled Milk, which is now celebrating 10 years of bad jokes. And once upon a time, she co-founded 2 restaurants in Seattle, which is where she lives now. We want you to engage in the conversation, so please ask a question in the chat, which you'll find the button at the bottom of your screen. We won't be able to get to all of the questions, but we're going to try our best. All right, let's now sit back and welcome to your own personal fireside chat, Elon Cameron and Molly Wizenberg.
Hello there.
Hello, welcome, Molly. It's so great to have you here in this kind of ethereal space.
I know. It's very weird. It's like I love watching the number of participants tick up as we get closer to like go time, and yet it's all sort of like, are you guys like really out there? Yeah, I wish we were all sitting in a big room together, but this is a nice second option.
Well, and I hear that this weekend was supposed to be another important event for you.
Yeah. My spouse and I were supposed to be celebrating our wedding this weekend. We got married in New York last November, and we were supposed to be having a big party with our family and friends. Really, our wedding.
Right.
Yesterday. So yeah, thanks a lot, COVID, but it was definitely the right thing to do. Keep everybody safe.
Yeah. Well, do we have Heather Spooner on the line yet? Is she here she was going to ask a question, I think. Heather, here she is. Heather, this is Molly. Molly, Heather.
Hi, Heather.
Hello.
I love your glasses.
Thank you.
So Heather had a similar experience in some ways to your story, Molly, and was just going to share a little bit, and I think had a question for you as well.
Yeah.
Hi, Molly. Hi, Elon. Hello, everyone out there. Similar to what I've been told about your story, Molly, found my wife later in life after I had followed what I call good girl checklist with my head down and my blinders on, doing all of the things getting engaged to my college boyfriend and calling off a wedding and all of those things. But I, in 2009, got on an airplane to fly back to Michigan from Georgia, where I was teaching, and got seated on an airplane next to this woman that I totally hit it off with. And in the next year, realized she was my person. She wasn't just a stranger that I had met on an airplane. So then I had to kind of come to terms with with my own internalized homophobia and my feelings about what it meant to love a woman, and how could I love a woman that's not what was on my checklist.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are 10 years later. We got married in 2017, and it is a beautiful story to tell. Not that it wasn't without its own hardship, but ultimately ended up working out for us. I think what a lot of people in my life tend to do is, especially upon meeting me for the first time, they want to write my backstory. So a lot of them assume that I have the Born This Way narrative as part of my story, and it's not. And I was wondering what your response is when people assume things about your past.
Yeah, it's so tricky because, well, so first of all, thank you for sharing all that, and congratulations on 10 years together.
Thank you.
I don't know if we're around the same age, but I grew up in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, and had an uncle who was openly gay and who died of what we now call AIDS. And I remember being a child and learning that my uncle was born that way, and that this was a way that those of us who cared about him could sort of excuse his being different. Do you know what I mean? Or excuse his living in a way that was non-normative. And so for me to then, have an experience, we had very much the same experience. I was 36 when I was selected for jury duty and wound up developing a devastating crush on a very masculine presenting female defense attorney. And what really drove me to write this book was this very idea of, I thought that I knew my backstory, right? Like I thought that it all made sense and that I knew who I was. And how could I deal, even just internally, with my own shame and confusion around having not known this about myself, if I was indeed born this way. And so I wanted to write this book because in many ways I wanted to spend some time really grappling with this question of, is everyone born with their sexual orientation, which is the way that we are mostly taught sexual orientation works, and the way that the whole LGBTQ plus rights movement has advocated for itself? Or is there some other framework for understanding shifts in identity and how common or rare they might be? And so in the process of writing this book, I came to get a lot of, I sought out a lot of information from other writers, but also from psychologists and people who have done studies of human sexuality to try to understand, and really came to realize that I think like so many things, the framework that we've been given doesn't actually fit nearly as many of us as we think, or as the dominant narrative would have us believe. And I feel like I have much more solid ground under myself now when I say to people like, no, I think I shifted. I think I changed. And just feeling that I can believe my own experience, because when I first felt this shift in me, I didn't believe myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a
Thank you.
disorienting feeling, right? To not believe yourself.
Yeah, it was, I spent a lot of time, I came out unnecessarily and awkwardly to a lot of people I think I probably didn't need to out myself to, because I felt like I needed to get out ahead of the narrative somehow. That if other people heard my story from someone else, they would never believe it, or they wouldn't believe the way that I actually experienced it and the way I actually lived it. And in many ways, so for as personal as I knew it would be to write this story, I felt a lot of relief by having the chance to write it and put it out into the world, and assert that what happened to me is real, and that that a lot of us experience a certain fluidity to our identity, whether it be sexuality or gender or any other type of identity. I mean, I think about, I'm a mother of an almost 8-year-old, and I spent most of my life and most of my adulthood not thinking I wanted to be a mother, and yet nobody seems to think that's an unbelievable identity shift to decide that you do, right?
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Heather, for coming in and visiting with us today. I know we'll see you on the interwebs at & Lettering Lab.
Indeed, you will. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thanks. So Molly, I mean, some of the things that you've already sort of touched on here are key features that I would really love to get to. Do you want to offer people a little synopsis of your book? I know you sort of introduced it a little bit, but is there anything else you want to share from that before we go into the question portion?
Well, so, so the book roughly follows this period in my life when, it opens with jury duty and with sort of what all of the ways that I tried to make this new understanding about myself fit within my life as it looked then. Yeah. So having been married to a man for almost a decade at that time, a mother to a young child. One thing that's really important to me about this book is not so much that I was able to, quote unquote, answer any of the questions that I went into it with, mm-hmm. but that that in the process of trying to understand my own story better and trying to understand what it means, what identity might be, and how much each of us can change and still feel like ourselves. In the process, I found a lot of peace with just with the questions themselves, and with allowing myself to really spend time sort of immersed in the questions. Because I think that ultimately allowing ourselves to be in a place of unknowing, or a place of asking questions, is so much richer than often where we are once we think we have the answers.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I read a tremendous amount.
You took a very scientific kind of tact to this also. You're like, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to get in there. I need to know some data points. I mean, I really love that. Not only the ways that you kind of interwove some of the really beautiful analogies and stuff with astronomy and chemistry, it kind of made me wonder, like, is there more science writing in your future?
Oh, that's so interesting. I love that you would ask that. So I don't know. I think that actually at the dinner table last night, we were all just talking about what we studied in college, my spouse and my daughter and I. Um, and my spouse is a psychotherapist and my daughter knows that I am a writer. And anyway, when we were asking her, I said, you know, do you know what I studied in college and in grad school? And she didn't know. And so we talked a little bit about what I studied, which is cultural anthropology.
Yeah.
And I was studying like cultural values around the social security system in France.
Wow.
But I think that, and when I left anthropology and decided not to be an academic and instead to pursue writing, I think I thought that I wasn't using what I studied. And now I realize, in trying to explain to an 8-year-old what anthropology is, that I'm still using the same tools that I learned then. I'm just using them on myself rather than on a different a population outside of myself.
It's an honorable subject to subject yourself to. But I do think it's really interesting, you know, including the scientific language that you use in the book. In my opinion, you really do come about this as a scientist because you are posing questions. You're more focused on posing really good questions than answering them and getting all the ducks in a row and being like, there, I've got my life all tidy and learn from me. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this book is you, with such lush language and with such an ability to convey a felt sense, not just of how you feel, but of place. Like, I really feel like I went some of those places with you. It's such a beautiful way to convey the feelings that you went through in some really uncomfortable situations. I wonder sometimes after a book like this comes out if you have like a vulnerability hangover for a while.
I think you know, it's interesting. I was outside earlier today. It's very hot in Seattle today. And I was outside watering the tomato plants and stuff we have growing out front. And one of our neighbors walked by and I don't know him extremely well. Anyway, I was out there in my bathing suit and he walked by with his dog and he said, you know, oh, Molly, I loved your book. Like, thank you for writing it. And I didn't know that he had read it. And
or that maybe you'd be standing in your bathing suit
or that
when
I'd be standing in
my,
I mean, it was my own judgment that sent me outside in my bathing suit to water the plants. But I have to take all the blame for that myself. But I have to say that there is something for me about the process of writing that, you know, moves me no matter what I'm writing about. So my first book was in large part about losing my father to cancer when I was in my early 20s. And I have always felt drawn to writing about the things that we struggle to talk about interpersonally. And the process of writing itself has always done this sort of alchemy on me personally. Nice. Where I enter into it in sort of a kind of gelatinous state and come out of it on the other side sort of somehow like healed over or firmed up, or like the ground is firmer underneath me.
I love that.
And so when I think about the idea of the vulnerability that this type of writing, the degree to which it makes me vulnerable, or the degree to which it means that people that I don't know well know me better than I know them by far. At the same time, I feel like writing the book itself gave me a certain like protective skin. Like, I like to talk sometimes when I'm teaching writing. I teach memoir, and I like to talk about the idea of the difference between writing from a wound or writing from a scar.
Oh.
And so when writing from a wound, you know, things are very raw. There's a lot of energy there, but it probably is not ready yet to be shared with anyone or with the world. It's very raw and often can hurt people or hurt the writer.
Gotcha.
And writing from a scar is very different in that we're writing from a healed place or from a place that we have done the work to sort of resolve, where we've metabolized the material. And I think that somehow when I think about what I wrote in this book, I don't have the same vulnerability to it that I did even when I was writing it, because that wound is scarred over a bit in a really helpful way.
Yeah, that's cool. I love how it kind of gave the book itself gives you like a superpower. You're like, nope, I already put that out there, so you can't come at me with my own personal information. It's kind of genius, in fact.
If you can survive to get it out there. Yeah, there were many periods when I was writing it, and for sure all the time, even now, that I have lots of doubts about what I wrote and how I feel about it and what it says about me. But at the end of the day, I also feel like it is a record of my it is a record of my life, and it is a record of surviving hard things, and I'm really glad for that.
Well, and I think that's the part that other people experience and are like, thank you. You know, that's the place where we can meet each other on the page and say, wow, if she got through this, then maybe my current circumstance isn't so bad. I also really love that this is your third book. You know, when we talk about musicians, there's this awareness that they have like a freshman album and a sophomore album, and we don't talk about that with writers as much. So I wanted to kind of get that sense from you, like, how is it in some way releasing your third book now that you're kind of like, you're a junior?
It feels really different. Really different. With my first book, I think the whole time I was writing it, I felt like I had somehow like pulled off this elaborate trick in getting a literary agent to sign me, and in getting a publisher interested in me, when the truth was I didn't know how to write a book, and I had to learn as I went along. And I think that is true for a lot of people, whether you have a degree in writing or not. You don't know how to write a book until you write one.
Right.
And so my first book, I think I definitely felt like somebody was going to figure out at any moment that I had no idea what I was doing. And with the second book, I think I felt stronger and more able to challenge myself. But I don't think I realized the pressures that are on a second book that aren't on a first book. And maybe this is the same when you talk about like a sophomore effort for a musician. You know, at least in book publishing, the second book notoriously doesn't do as well. The author is often sort of struggling to define themselves in the wake of either, a successful first book or, at least
Scandal.
Right. Scandal. And so, doing this third book has felt so, it's hard to say how much of it is that I'm in just a different place in my own life.
Right.
But it has felt so different in that I really felt, I felt, I think, braver in terms of getting in and mucking around and setting high standards for this book and figuring out how I was going to achieve them.
I love that. Were there any specific practices that you kind of brought in to help you with that braveness and setting high standards?
I used to think that I was someone who was a real, who really thrived on routine.
Hmm.
Um, but having now been self-employed for 13 years, I have learned that I was so wrong. That
Ah,
I think there's a big difference for me between needing structure to my work and needing like routines or rituals. So I definitely am someone who needs structure, and I certainly created journaling practices that I wouldn't, that I don't otherwise have the discipline to keep when I'm not working on a big project.
mm-hmm.
But more than anything, it was just the structure of knowing that each day I was going to get up and write this book, and the satisfaction of being able to look back at the end of the day and see that I had written words that didn't exist that morning. And that was sort of like a scaffolding that I could climb up until you know, the building was taking shape around me.
Right. Those little triumphs really do matter.
Mm-hmm.
What has that difference been for you in kind of recognizing the difference between routine and structure? Like, how has that helped you, or how has that better informed your writing practice?
Well, you know, we always hear about, at least I have always heard about writers having, you know, like a real practice, getting up and doing their morning pages.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Julia Cameron
Yeah.
morning pages concept. Writers getting up and doing their morning pages, or so I grew up in Oklahoma, and there's an amazing arts program for teenage kids in Oklahoma called the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute. It's for teenagers. And I went there when I was a teenager for poetry. And then when I was in college, I went back and was like a camp counselor there.
Oh, cool.
And I remember feeling so inspired by the poetry teachers in this program, and being there in my early 20s, and looking at them particularly to see sort of how they lived adulthood as writers.
Mm.
You know, this is a very different perspective from how I had looked at them when I was when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember looking at them and hearing them say to these high school students, you know, well, like, I get up and I am at my desk by 8 a.m. and I write until 1 p.m. And then in the afternoon I read, or I teach classes, or whatever. But they had this, I remember actually one of them, yeah, he would sit at his desk from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. and he would wear the same sweatshirt every day that he wrote. And he'd been wearing it for like more than a decade. It was like this costume he put on to like, to inhabit being a writer. It makes a lot of sense to me. But I think I thought that if I were a quote unquote real writer, that I would have that kind of discipline, or that I would really show up and I can't remember what writer it is who said this, but I would keep the fire engine polished by, you know, working on it every day, so that when the call came, we'd be ready to go roaring out of the firehouse.
Right.
And I have never been that kind of writer. And so I think that for me, a lot of the process of having been a writer for many years now has been forgiving myself for not being the kind of writer that I thought I would be, and having some grace for myself in periods when I just don't have anything to say.
Wow. Yeah, because we do hear that trope all the time. Like, oh, you know, morning people, they get up and they're writing at their desk for hours every day. And it's like, okay, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciate that you're breaking up that little notion a little bit there too. I know that you come from a kind of a writing background that in some ways had been thought of as thematically and surrounded by food. And I just wondered if there's certain things that having done so much writing about intimate experiences, if that kind of informs your writing as well.
Well, it's interesting. So yeah, I started out as a food writer, and I thought that I was just writing about food. I had grown up in a family of avid home cooks and food lovers, and um, I wanted to, you know, be on the pages of Gourmet magazine or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was only after writing for quite a while about food that I realized that what interested me actually wasn't so much the food. It was the way that food is in many ways, like an anchor in everyday life, and the way that that food anchors moments of interaction between people, and that it was the people that I was actually interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, as I allowed my quote unquote food writing to shift to sometimes hardly be about food at all, or to use food as sort of a springboard into writing about a relationship or something more personal, that I realized that what I was actually interested in was what it's like to be a human, and what we value about relationships. And over time, actually, I realized that the exercise of writing about food sort of tuned me up and allowed me to access those sort of bigger, more abstract moments. I think that good food writing is good writing, period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I can't say enough good about this book. For those of you who haven't read it yet, get a copy. They're available at Horizon Books for a little discount, and I believe there's some signed copies left there. But really, just that the idea that you wrote a book of questions to then explore rather than answer, I think is really beautiful. And I wonder, you know, in that exploration, what you feel are the more kind of salient parts of your identity, or what are the unchanging things? You know, I feel like there's a point in the book where you reach where you're just like, what's left, you know, to question at this point.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that was like for you, both as a person living the experience and being like, whoa, what is really me? But also from this other perspective of writer, and having watched this history unfold and sort of writing about it in this context. Like, what did you discover there?
I think that, gosh, I love that question. Thank you for all of these thoughtful questions that you're asking. I know all the work that goes
thinking about
into
your book for weeks.
I think that in many ways, what this story that I lived and this story that I wrote down, I think that it is ultimately about the thing that I have sort of grappled with the most in my life, and something that I think most humans maybe grapple with, which is change. And how do we feel grounded within ourselves when everything is constantly changing, both within us and outside of us. And I have always struggled deeply with change, even something as small as I remember really struggling at the beginning of a new quarter in college. Like every new quarter, this simple thing that you can predict that happens over and over and over, just the shift in everything would undo me for a while. And it's not that I got any better at coping with change. But I think that this thing that hopefully happens to all of us as we age and as we grow up is a little bit of what happened to me through this microcosm of this shift in my sexuality, which is that I got to discover that I could go through tremendous change and still be okay, and still recognize myself on the other side of it. And I think that's something that I will probably have to learn many more times in my life. But I think that this experience, despite the sort of groundlessness that I felt as I was living it, helped me find a certain stability within myself, like that I could withstand it.
Yeah. That there was some core of you that was unmutable, or that was essentially made of Molly stuff.
Molly stuff, exactly.
I love
That's me.
That's the best any of us can hope for, really, right? And I guess because I see you as a scientist in this book, I have a background in science, so I might be projecting a little bit.
What aspect of science do you have a background in?
I have studied human science, basically anatomy and physiology, but also Chinese medicine and some other things like that. So, but I'm a total nerd for anatomy and physiology because I think it's so fascinating. Like, we're driving around these meat suits and there are millions of miracles happening every second. But as I've, decided you're a scientist now, I hope that's okay.
Great. I'm all for it. I'm here. I'm going to make new business cards now.
Yes, excellent.
Elon
Call
says.
your publisher. I wondered if there were any specific questions that you really wanted to leave the reader with, that you wanted the reader to be not stuck with, but left with in a way that kind of like that's a gift that's going to continue to unfold over the course of time that they give it thought.
One moment in this story that was really that really shifted things for me was when I started to think about the idea of what is normal in relationships, in close relationships. It is so true that we can never really know what another person's marriage is like or another person's partnership. But it certainly seemed to me over the decades of sort of adult life that I had lived at the point at which I had this jury duty experience, that that many people in relationships often didn't like their partner very much, or that there was a very, very fine line between the kinds of compromises we make in partnership for the sake of the us, or for the sake of our partner's hopes and dreams. There are certain compromises we make that will continue to feed us as a unit. And then there are compromises we make that will come back to bite us later. And it was very hard for me from the inside of my relationship, my first marriage, to see what were the compromises that were normal to make, that other people were making in their relationships, and that I should be okay with making, and that would be good for both of us. And what were the kind of compromises or aspects of myself that I was giving away, where I was giving away something about myself or something that I deeply wanted. And I think that this is very confusing when you look at popular culture or even magazines, self-help books. It is very hard to learn, except through the pain of experience, that what is normal for other people or normal for other relationships doesn't have to be okay with me.
Right.
Or for my relationship.
Well,
and oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And so something that I thought about a lot as I was writing this book was this question of what is normal in relationships, and how does anybody know what compromises to say yes to? And what does that idea of normalcy even mean to me? That at the end of the day, I need to decide what is okay with me. But and so I hope that at least for readers who might be grappling with some of the same questions or thematic questions that I was wrestling with in this book, that maybe that idea of not so much what is normal, but what is going to be normal for me, what is going to be okay with me, that's a question that we can all use to animate our searches for fulfilling lives and relationships.
Just that.
It's very easy.
I think that's an important point of clarification. Like, what are you doing that's like giving to the whole, and what are you doing that's taking from the individual?
Yeah.
Those are important details to consider.
Yeah.
I know we have some people eager to ask questions. I just have one final question, and that's sort of a tangential one. I'm also married to someone who's non-binary, and it's always interesting in my experience, having come out as queer when I was in my early 20s, it was always that cagey thing where you'd be like pretending you weren't going to say the gender of the person you're dating. So you could be like, well, they're going to be around later. And so it's always a funny thing when people are like, you can just tell me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a total lesbian, but my spouse is non-binary. So it's a funny thing where I feel like we're in this moment in history, which is so great, where, the gender binary is hopefully, gently dissolving or moving toward entropy as we speak. And I think that in some ways, the identity politic of sexual identity is a similar thing. And I just wanted to know if you have any specific thoughts about that, especially in your current marriage.
Yeah, I think that, for one thing, as I was writing this book, one of my dearest friends has a child who is non-binary, who is in high school.
Wow.
And for them, these ideas that I was exploring and these questions that I had, it seemed so like old hat to them. And I think that it gives me so much hope. And I recognize I also live in a real bubble here in Seattle. But it gives me so much hope that I think that at least there are more people embracing the idea that all of these identities, or so many identities, that we have used to help us place ourselves in the world and place other people, that they are all just that, things that we have used. And we get to redefine them, and we get to decide how important they're going to be to us going forward. So yeah, it's interesting in my current relationship because, I left a straight marriage, but I never also felt comfortable. I haven't used the identity lesbian very much. Although Ash and I will sometimes sort of jokingly make like lesbian jokes, even though Ash is non-binary. But it's been so refreshing to me to be in a partnership with someone who is actively engaged in understanding and negotiating their own self, because it makes me feel so much more at home in not not always needing or having or wanting to give myself an identity name. I mean, I think queer is the closest thing for me.
Yeah. Nice.
But
it's a roomy basket. There's lots
it
of
is.
space, right?
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
All right. Jody, do you have any questions for us? I know there's some people who've been eager at the chat who wanted to ask some questions maybe. I'm attempting to look in my chat. Okay. So, a question from Donna. How do you face those same issues about what is normal now that you are in a different relationship, or are those issues no longer relevant now that your sexuality has been redefined?
Oh no, those issues are still totally there. It's just they're no longer along gender lines now.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same way that that Ash and I don't tend to divvy up like domestic work along gender lines now, because we both have the same parts, and we were both raised as female. We don't tend to divvy up any of our domestic work along gender lines. We divide it up along like lines of preference, or who is this task most or least annoying to. And I would say the same thing about our like values and things that we struggle with in our relationship. They just now it's more like, is this thing that you are doing, or this way that you are behaving, okay with me? How are we going to work together as a partnership to deal with the fact that we're really different people? We're still really different people.
That's not.
Yeah, we're still really different people. It's still really challenging. But in many ways, it's really nice to not have sort of the, not that I ever bought into the men are Mars, women are from Venus kind of thing, but those sort of expectations that like hover in the ether, you know, like the man is going to be good at all the things involving power tools.
Sure.
It's really nice to just kind of get to start from scratch and decide who we're going to be to each other.
Nice.
Irrespective or you know, without information from whatever labels we have.
Yeah. And then along those lines, another question came through. Said, when I was in your class in Santa Fe, I remember you referring to the Argonauts and Diamond's research, which are both, where now? In your book. I'm curious about how, when the title, motif, theme of stars, constellations emerged for you in the writing process.
So I started writing this book about, hi, by the way. I started writing this book about 3 years ago. And it was maybe 6 months into the writing that I knew that stars were going to be a theme in it, and that in the course of a conversation with a friend, I learned about this idea, the fixed stars, and then sort of was very fired up to learn more about astronomy.
Very cool.
And so it really came organically along with all the other things that I was reading and all the things that I was writing. Yeah, it all happened really organically. But it certainly it did take some intentional drawing out of that theme, because it was a whole extra layer of learning that I was trying to do on top of, you know, the more thematic things like issues of queerness or gender binary and things like that.
Very cool. Another question from Heather asked, did you give up different things in your previous marriage than you do in your current marriage?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I think that it's hard to even quantify the difference. I certainly, Ash and I both make plenty of compromises in our relationship, and give up certain things in order to be with each other. But it feels wholly different. I feel like I also have learned a little bit about how to fight for what I need, which I think is a real skill, and I'm still learning it. But Ash is helping me to learn it and supporting my learning it in a
Nice.
way that I think my previous partnership, because of who we were, there just wasn't space for both of us to get what we needed.
Yeah. Well, I've referred to your book a couple of times as an adult coming of age story, because there is this aspect of, we don't study the developmental changes that people experience in their 30s and 40s, but that doesn't mean that they don't happen. And I think that it's such an interesting thing to consider that, this is an experience of becoming oneself, not of studying a self that is complete.
Yes. Yeah.
I've got a couple questions here, pieces of advice that you have for aspiring writers, or anything that you'd like to recommend to aspiring writers.
Sure. So I'm going to give some sort of like general stuff here. The first one for me, and I think this is so important, is to set really, really high standards for yourself, even if you know you can't achieve them right now. And even if it is painful to see your own work in comparison to your standards. We only get better at what we do by setting our standards really high and trying to achieve it. And the way for me that I have set, or that I have continued to try to keep learning and trying to keep getting better at my own writing, is through reading widely, reading writers from all different places, work that originates in many different languages and not just English, work that's been published not just, now, but old writing. It gives me so much perspective on how I am writing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I know that these are sort of big principles or just big pieces of advice, but I really mean it. I think that part of what allowed me to write this book the way that I wanted to write it was the incredible quality of the authors that I was reading and trying to be in conversation with in my own mind. I feel such a debt of gratitude to these writers who paved the way for me.
Well, and I will say that I always make a list of books that if people quote something from a book, or if they make reference to another book, I always make a list and put it inside my notes from the book. And you have quite a lovely writing list attached to your book. So if people just read the books that are attached to the book that you've already written, I think they'll probably become better writers, just based on that, if I may be so bold.
Well, at a certain point in doing all that reading, I was like, I need to keep a record of this. And because this book can't possibly, contain and acknowledge all of those writers' ideas, I thought I need to find a way to credit them and to share them. So yeah, I'm so happy that bibliography is there.
That's so great. Okay, we have another question. Several people who are grateful for you being here, and thank you very much. Someone wants to know what will become of Orangette. I'm sure that's a question you get a lot.
I don't know. I do not know. The blog, so even though over the years, I think I sort of contorted it to be what I needed it to be, which was at a certain point, I didn't want to just be writing about food anymore. I sort of wanted to free myself up a bit from that. because also in truth, I'm a pretty repetitive home cook.
Mm.
So I can only write about food for so many years before I'm going to start recycling recipes. But the other thing is that the options for me for, so a blog is a free thing.
Mm.
And I didn't want to put it behind a paywall. And the options for me to be able to find a way to make a living through it, I wasn't satisfied with a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point in time, actually, a lot of it for me is learning in this particular world we're living in, how do I maintain a writing practice and be able to get paid for it for, after 16 years of blogging.
I think it's a radical thing for women to suggest that they deserve to be paid for things that men have been paid for millennia.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm so grateful to the blog. Like it's the foundation of my whole career as a writer. And yet, yeah, I need to make money by writing.
Fair enough.
So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know yet.
We have just a few minutes left, so just a couple questions here. I was wondering if you have any COVID-19 survival strategies or recommendations. I know you said that you were watering the garden earlier. A lot of people have been doing some gardening. Just wondering if your little family has done anything that's been helpful to keep you all sane during this time of unprecedentedness.
Yeah, no, we have done a lot of things that I could have expected knowing us, and then some things that are just sort of random. We have all, so we all really like making things with our hands, and we have all really leaned hard into that. Tons of sewing projects, knitting projects,
nice.
Cooking. Ash has been building a tree house in our backyard.
Awesome.
I have been attempting to learn how to garden with mixed results. But even more than that, like just some sort of weird stuff. Like we installed a big yoga silk from a central beam in our living room, so that our daughter could have basically like a place to play that's indoors.
That's great.
It's about to get really rainy here. So she spends a lot of time playing like in this kind of
like an indoor hammock, right?
It is. It's like an indoor hammock.
Great.
It also has the benefit of, we call it the womb. If you've had a really stressful day, you get to lie in the womb.
You can have, Temple Grandin was on the National Writers Series one time, and so she had that theory of the hug.
Yes. I thought I recognized her in the slideshow.
Yeah.
That, and then just trying to, we feel really lucky that we are able to get outside and have space from people.
Yeah.
So, even if that just means like hanging out in our driveway.
That counts.
Yeah, it really counts. It makes a huge difference.
So, notes from Molly: hang out in your driveway, do handicrafts.
Yes, and consider installing some sort of indoor recreation device from a well-reinforced structure in your ceiling.
There's just one last question here, and someone was asking for a little bit of clarification about the business side of writing, finding an agent, publisher, finding a publishing deal. Obviously that's different for every person, but do you have any recommendations on how to go about that magical trick?
Oh yeah, it does feel a bit like magic at times. So in general, these days, a major publishing house will want to work with you only if you have an agent, and this is a very tricky thing because there are barriers to getting an agent. You have to do a fair amount of writing to be able to show to an agent. There are also books, I should say, out there, and directories where you can find different literary agencies that specialize in different kinds of writing. And it seems like the barrier is really high, and I will acknowledge that. And at the same time, new writers are getting published all the time. So if you are dedicated to a writing practice and you have some material that you feel confident about, maybe you have worked on it with a friend who's a really good reader, or maybe you've hired an independent editor, and you feel that your work is ready to submit and you want to try to get an agent, do some research, find agents that are in the field that you would like to be writing in, whether it's young adult fiction or maybe writing about food and beverage, and start querying them and sending them your best, most polished work. And from there, certainly there are plenty of publishing houses that will work with unagented for you to have an agent. So yeah, I could go on and on. I feel like this is just barely dipping my toe in the water. But write and revise, get help from a friend or an independent editor or manuscript reader, and put yourself out there, because yeah, there are debut novelists and debut writers debuting every Tuesday. Books come out every Tuesday. Who knew?
Oh, great.
So yeah, go do it.
Well, I just can't say enough how much I've enjoyed talking with you, Molly, and how much I enjoyed your book. It's just a testament to the human heart and your ability to really transport people into some uncomfortable situations that you can really feel are really, I mean, I think that's a feather you get to put in your hat as a writer. So I hope you feel proud of yourself, even though your normal book tour is a little different this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
We definitely appreciate you being here and welcome you back next time you have a book to bring to these North Woods. We'd hope to have you.
Oh,
So
thank you so much.
Such a treat.
This was such a pleasure, and I absolutely loved your questions. It was a true conversation, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yay. Well, more of that. Please, everyone who's watching, tune back in on September 10th. I'll be interviewing Chasten Buttigieg at 7 p.m. that night. Be sure you get your copy of The Fixed Stars from Horizon Books, where you can get a little National Writers Series discount and may even be able to score one of the signed copies yet. And keep reading. Let's all get through this by being that authentic part of ourselves that's full of questions and maybe not so many answers, right? Yay. Well, thank you, Molly.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was an absolute delight, and good luck heading back into the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody enjoy your Sunday evening.
Yay. Well, happy day. All right.
Thank you so much.